boy is back once again. What's good in sports? What's good in life? What's good with ya? Name is Akiem Balaam, of course. So, been some weeks, since I've been, recording videos. I've just had a lot going on, but trust me, I will start upping the content really soon because, like I said, when I made my return video, there's so much out there to be talked about. So, I wanted to get on here and just kind of recap the 2023 WNBA season. So the season concluded last Wednesday with the Las Vegas Aces prevailing over the New York Liberty in 4 games to win back-to-back WNBA finals. 24 points, 16 rebounds in that game. 4 from 1 A'ja Wilson earned her MVP honors. I remember there was a lot of chatter on WNBA Twitter when the regular season MVP was announced, and of course it was announced that it was Breanna Stewart who won regular season MVP, and lots of folks were like, wait a second, what about some love for A'ja? What about some love for Alyssa Thomas? But she prevailed with the finals MVP and her second championship. So I just wanted to come on here a little bit and just recap the season. And what a season it was. I mean, back during the free agent period in the run-up to this season, there was so much talk, so much speculation, so much hullabaloo about what the finals would be. Would it indeed be Las Vegas Aces versus New York Liberty? And as it turned out, it indeed was Las Vegas Aces versus New York Liberty. And going into that finals, I think that there were a lot of folks who were thinking, maybe the Liberty have a chance to pull this off. I mean, they won the regular season series, if you consider the Commissioner's Cup, even though it didn't factor into the actual records of both Vegas and New York. But the Liberty did win the Commissioner's Cup. Jonquel Jones was MVP of the Commissioner's Cup. So that was kind of a sign that maybe, just maybe, there could be something with this Liberty team where maybe they could indeed beat the Aces in a finals. And then on top of everything else, let's also remember, up until that game 4, one thing that the Aces had failed to do for all of their accomplishments this year, all of their accolades, the fact that they once again clinched the #1 overall seed, the fact that they pretty much made a statement to say, okay, once again, you want to go ahead and win a championship, you got to go through Michelob Ultra Arena. You got to go through A'ja Wilson. You got to go through Chelsea Gray. You got to go through Kelsey Plum. You got to go through Jackie Young if you want that championship. Interesting how the championship kind of bulked up from last year's as well. But if you want a championship, you got to go through Sin City. You got to go through Win City because Vegas, they're on a bit of a winning streak right now. 2 championships for the Aces, 1 championship with the Vegas Golden Knights, 1 Stanley Cup for the Golden Knights. Vegas is gone from Sin City to Win City as of late. They're kind of low-key the new title town. Then there's the Raiders. But what a season it was for the WNBA. 27th season, once again showing real growth, that it is indeed a sport, a league of the future. Really, women's basketball and women's sports are really experiencing a high. You think about what happened before the WNBA season back in the college ranks with LSU and Iowa. You think about the fact that the WNBA itself did that Canada game at Scotiabank Arena in Toronto between the Minnesota Lynx and the Chicago Sky, and the fact that it was a massive success, not only in terms of gate, but also in terms of merch sales. So the trajectory for the W is only going in one direction, and that is indeed up. But as far as the season, once again, what a season. I mean, you knew the Aces were going to be in contention from start to finish. You knew the Liberty were going to be in contention from start to finish, even though the Liberty kind of stumbled a bit out of the gate. But they got it together as we know they would. Connecticut, they were a huge surprise pleasantly this season because, remember, they lost Kurt Miller and Jasmine Thomas both to LA. And as it turned out, Alyssa Thomas emerged as an MVP candidate with all of the triple doubles that she was dropping left and right throughout the season. Dallas, under first year head coach Latricia Trammell, emerged as a legit contender, and they have a strong core. You think about Arike Ogunbowale. Satu Sabali emerged as an MVP candidate. Folks were talking about her for MVP earlier in the season. You think about Tiara McCowan. You think about Natasha Howard. Dallas has arrived after so many years of winning draft lotteries. The Dallas Wings are in the business of winning games. They got to the semifinals. They actually gave the Aces a bit of a game, particularly in that game 3. I thought they were going to extend it out to a game 4, but look out. Dallas is a team that is no slouch. You're going to have to start putting them on the schedule as a team to really think about in the coming seasons. But Dallas had a really successful season. You think about a team like Minnesota. I mean, the Minnesota Lynx, they were a team that I think me and a bunch of other observers were really thinking as a team that probably was going to end up potentially maybe even tanking for either home state hero Paige Beckers or maybe for Caitlin Clark. But as it turned out, not only did the Minnesota Lynx make the playoffs, and a big part of that was because they had Nafisa Collier back, but they actually gave the Connecticut Sun a series. They actually extended that first round playoff series with the Connecticut Sun out to a third and deciding game. So props to Cheryl Reeve. She did it again. Props to the Minnesota Lynx. They got something going on up there. Nafisa Collier, Kayla McBride, Dorka Juhas really emerged. Diamond Miller really emerged. She probably would have been Rookie of the Year if not for somebody by the name of Aaliyah Boston in Indiana. So big shout out to the Minnesota Lynx. The Washington Mystics, though. The Washington Mystics. Injuries. Whether it was Elena Delle Donne or Shakira Austin, it just seemed like that the Washington Mystics, and this was a team that gave the Liberty everything it can handle and then some. I thought, once I was doing previews of the season for BeyondTheW.com, I thought the Washington Mystics were going to be one of those teams that would give the Aces and Liberty a bit of a scare throughout the season. And they probably would have. They gave the Liberty a huge scare, and that's what with the team that they were able to field. I mean, Natasha Cloud had a great game, in that game too, even though the Liberty had won that game. But it's a shame what happened to Washington. They should have been better than what they were. Injuries all over the place. And the same, quite frankly, also rang true for the LA Sparks. I mean, they were also big time bit by the injury bug, unfortunately. So that put a damper on Kurt Miller's first season as coach of the Sparks. So not the season that the Sparks were expecting. The Atlanta Dream. This is a team that I believe is on the up and up. This is a team that I definitely believe is on the up and up. They really established a big 3 this year. When you think about Alicia Gray, you think about Cheyenne Parker, you think about Ryan Howard, who was last year's Rookie of the Year, and they made that step not only to a playoff berth, but to a 5 seed. In 2022, the Atlanta Dream were on the outside looking in of the playoffs, but barely. So the goal for the Atlanta Dream this year was playoffs, and they got there. Now it's a matter of the Dream taking that next step, and I would not be surprised if the Dream were in on BG. I would not be surprised if they were in on Brittany Griner, and that would be a move that would really take them, I believe, over the top and really solidify their contender status. So we'll see what the Dream do throughout the offseason. And if it's one thing that I know for sure, Dan Padover, who is the general manager of the Dream, he knows what the flip he is doing. So expect the Dream to be even better in 2024. So yeah, absolutely. Definitely expect them to be better in 2024. Did I already reel off all of the playoff teams? No, I didn't. Chicago barely got into the playoffs because they were in as the 8th seed. We all knew they were going down in a sweep to the Aces in that first round. But props to Chicago. I mean, they went through a coaching change midway through the season, with James Wade taking that job with the Toronto Raptors. So props to the Chicago Sky. I mean, they went through a lot this season. They went through a lot in the offseason, losing Candace Parker to Vegas, losing Courtney Vandersloot to New York. Allie Quigley didn't come back. So they went through a lot, and they still made the playoffs. They actually started the season 5-1 And that, I think, is what is remarkable when you look at not only Chicago, but also Minnesota. Chicago started the season 5-1. Minnesota started the season 0-6, even though a lot of those losses weren't necessarily quote-unquote bad losses. But still, Minnesota started the season 0-6, then they started to emerge, including getting a victory over the Liberty in Barclays Center. Big ups to the Lynx. And you think about the Sky, they started the season at 5-1 and had a lot of folks, including myself, thinking, oh, wow, maybe the Sky haven't lost a beat despite losing pretty much their entire core. But they eventually fell back down to earth and were the 8th seed in the playoffs. But yeah, the Chicago Sky, very roller coaster season for the Sky, even though, shout out to Kalea Copper. In fact, today, as I was recording this video, they introduced T-Spoon. Teresa Weatherspoon is the new coach of the Sky. So I think the Sky could very well be a team because of that move, getting T-Spoon as their new coach. They still got to decide on who's going to be their GM because they're finally going to separate their GM and coach roles. They got to find out who's going to be their general manager. So that'll be something to definitely follow as the offseason progresses. Now we get into the lottery teams. I already talked about one of the lottery teams in LA. I got to mention Phoenix. Phoenix was one of those teams that I think a lot of us were really thinking were going to be a contender this season. Of course, BG coming back from that awful situation that she was in 2022 in Russia. So that definitely was going to give an emotional lift, not only to the team, but to the WNBA entirely. But when you think about it, the Mercury were really just nothing more than a 2-woman show with Diana Taurasi and Brittany Griner. I mean, and it definitely showed throughout the season. So it's looking more and more and more like, unfortunately, the Phoenix Mercury, and they just introduced Nate Tibbetts as their head coach. And I fully believe he's nothing more than a transitional coach. But it looks like the Mercury are careening towards a rebuild. BG's an unrestricted free agent, and we know how Skylar Diggins-Smith feels about the Mercury right about now. So really, when you think about it, next year is pretty much going to be, it is almost assuredly going to be Diana Taurasi's final season. I mean, All-Star is in Phoenix next year. You got the Olympics. Taurasi probably wants to get one more gold medal before she rides off into the sunset. So Phoenix Mercury definitely about to rebuild. You think about the Seattle Storm. The Seattle Storm, we knew that they weren't going to be as good as they were last year because of losing Stewie to New York and, Sue Bird, of course, retiring. But Jewel Lloyd had a really, really great individual season. Set a single-season WNBA scoring record, scored 31 points at the All-Star game to claim All-Star MVP honors. Ezzy Magmagor is really emerging as a defensive anchor for the Storm. And then the big win, of course, was the fact that Talisa Ray, the general manager of the Storm, was able to re-up with Jewel Lloyd, with the Gold Mamba, for a contract extension. So obviously, Jewel Lloyd really likes what she is seeing in the Emerald City. So now the task for the Seattle Storm is to put pieces around Jewel Lloyd, around Ezzy Magmagor, and possibly build them up to maybe a contender next year, maybe a playoff team. Who knows? We'll see what happens with the Seattle Storm. And then the Indiana Fever. I mean, the whole story of the Indiana Fever basically was Aaliyah Boston, Aaliyah Boston, Aaliyah Boston. Aaliyah Boston and Kelsey Mitchell were both All-Stars this past season. Aaliyah Boston, an All-Star as a rookie. And of course, the runaway Rookie of the Year. I mean, Aaliyah Boston pretty much ran away with Rookie of the Year the millisecond she got on the court for that first game against Connecticut. And then we saw an improved Indiana Fever team. I mean, the Fever won 13 games this past season, which by Fever standards is pretty damn good. So now the Fever have something. And I predicted before the season that the Fever may very well be on the outside looking into the playoffs, but not by that much. Because I remember what the Aces did in 18 when they drafted Asia Wilson, and they were on the outside looking in of the playoffs. Indiana had the first overall pick, also drafted a generational talent out of South Carolina, and we saw improvement by the Indiana Fever. There were a lot of games that the Indiana Fever lost this season that in previous seasons would have been blowouts. There was a lot of development, a lot of positive steps, in my opinion, taken by the Fever. So I think the Fever are on the up and up. I would not be surprised if the Fever made the playoffs in a couple of years. So we'll see what happens. But Indiana, I think, is a team to definitely watch in the future. Now with the season over, and now with the Aces once again having prevailed, and they had their parade, and of course Becky Hammond was lit. You know Asia was lit. You know the whole team was going to be lit for that parade in Vegas, and they definitely were. But now we look into the offseason. What's going to be the big storylines of the offseason? Well, will we find out what the name of the team in the Golden State, in the Bay Area, is going to be? Where will Skylar Diggins-Smith land? I think Connecticut has a really good chance to get her. I think the Liberty may have a good chance to get Skylar Diggins-Smith potentially. I'm looking at those two teams in particular. I would not be surprised to see BG in an Atlanta Dream uniform. What will the Chicago Sky do? Could the Chicago Sky potentially be in on Skylar? I think we're going to see potentially the same sort of thing that we saw with James Wade. I would not be surprised if we saw that once again with Teresa Weatherspoon. I feel like players are going to want to play for the Chicago Sky because Teaspoon's now their coach. So we'll see what happens throughout the offseason. It should be a very interesting offseason. Of course, the draft lottery, lots of folks are going to be watching that to see who's going to have that opportunity to draft Caitlin Clark, #1 overall. Will Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, Paige Beckers, will they use their COVID years to possibly stay in college for an additional season so they could pocket more NIL money? So we will definitely see. It will be a very, very, very interesting offseason in the WNBA for sure. Absolutely. So I just wanted to come here, just rant a little bit. Well, maybe not rant, but, just kind of give my thoughts on the season now having concluded. What are your thoughts on the season? What are your thoughts on the overall just growth of women's sports? Rate, comment, react, reply, add, and subscribe. So until next time, this is Akiem Balaam, WNBA fan and media dude extraordinaire, signing off. See you on the internet someplace.